My name is Mark Pritchett. I'm a Senior Vice President for the Gulf Coast Community Foundation. We're located in Venice. We are the largest community foundation in Florida, and we're privileged to be here today to honor the servicemen and women that have served our country in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we have a special treat because we're going to be revealing the first nationwide report that also includes a survey and focus groups on how war is impacting families. And we're privileged to have Governor Carroll here today with us, and so we're looking forward to her remarks also. Just to give you a quick rundown of the agenda, I'll be highlighting why we went into this study, a little bit of the background. Dr. Bob McClure from James Madison will talk about the findings, the major findings. Governor Carroll will speak. Then we'll have three nonprofits speak that have received money from our foundation to actually help the men and women in our state. And then we'll have Lieutenant Colonel Steve Murray from the Department of Veteran Affairs here in Florida. And then Dr. McManus will talk about how we did the study, and then we'll conclude with questions and answers. So welcome again, and thank you. First of all, I would like to acknowledge all the people that really worked hard on this study. It's been almost a year in the making, and you're probably wondering, well, why Florida, and how did we get this community foundation get to be part of this nationwide movement? Well, our community foundation was one of 3 in Florida to receive $5 million, or a total of $15 million, to service our men and women that have served in Afghanistan and Iraq. And there have only been 2 other states that have received dollars from a private beneficiary to do this, and that's California and Texas. And you're probably wondering, well, why Florida? Florida is only second to California in the number of veterans that have been serviced in this, have served in overseas in different wars. And also, we're home to 13 military bases. So we have constant deployments and reintegrations here in Florida. So what we would like to do next is to turn it over to Bob McClure and let him tell you a little bit about the study itself, and then we'll continue down the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. As Mark said, I'm Bob McClure, President and CEO of the James Madison Institute, a public policy think tank based in Tallahassee. And though we are based here in Tallahassee, we are statewide, as most of you all know. I would like to thank Governor Carroll for being here, and I will more formally introduce her in just a couple of minutes. The Gulf Coast Community Foundation for their partnership in all of this effort. And also, of course, to Dr. Susan McManus, who did all of the superb work on this study and will be able to answer many of your questions as we go forward. Also, would like to take a brief moment of personal privilege to acknowledge Admiral Collins, who we have dedicated this report to, was a close personal friend of my family. I had known the Admiral virtually my entire life, and it was one of the most difficult days I've had in many, many years. Just a great, great man. As you know, the James Madison Institute is focused on advancing the principles of liberty and more personal responsibility. And we're a proud partner in this study with Dr. McManus and the Gulf Coast Community Foundation on a project that advances the principles of our organization, looking specifically at how best to help our returning men and women. I think there are 2 significant ways, but I'm also going to talk with you briefly about 3 findings, but I think there are 2 ways that are very important to understand. One is we need to work to make government services more efficient, which is part of the mission of the James Madison Institute, more transparent, which has also been an extremely important issue for us, so that they can become more effective in helping our returning men and women from Iraq and Afghanistan. In a day when government services lack both the dollars and in many cases lack the capability because of, in some parts, bureaucratic largesse, empowering private philanthropy to better serve those who have returned is a key component that we have seen in this study. And I would like to highlight 3 aspects of that. First and foremost, 92% of Floridians view assisting our returning men and women from Iraq and Afghanistan is very important. 92%. I don't know that we can get 92% of Floridians to agree that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So I think that's a very, very critical finding, very important. I think the second component is that veterans often go without the help they need for a couple of reasons that I think need to be highlighted. First, they may lack confidence in government agencies. They are unaware of services, perhaps because of the bureaucracy. And they come from a culture of self-reliance, of personal responsibility. Current government services need to be much more efficient, much more transparent to better serve our veterans. And the final component that I think needs to be highlighted is that private philanthropy provides many of the services that government either cannot or does not perform. Moreover, private philanthropy is often more streamlined, can be more sensitive to family needs and to the needs of returning men and women, and can be more transparent and more efficient as we search for ways to effectively help our veterans. So I would like to ask Lieutenant Governor to come forward. Jennifer Carroll needs no introduction to this group. Not only is Lieutenant Governor of this great state, not only is she the Lieutenant Governor of this great state, but she understands fully the challenges that our returning men and women face every day, as well as their families. Small business owner, legislator, extremely important to know that she's retired after 20 years in the Navy as Lieutenant Commander Aviation Maintenance Officer, won numerous awards, including 2 Navy Commendation Medals, 2 Navy Achievement Medals, Meritorious Service Medal, 2 Sea Service Ribbons, National Defense Service Medal, and on and on. So I would like to ask Lieutenant Governor to come forward and make a few comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This is really timely and well needed within the state of Florida and our nation. Yesterday we lost our last surviving World War I veteran, 110 years old. Now we go into our World War II veterans, our Korean War veterans, and it goes on. Currently, we're dealing with OEF, OIF returning veterans that are coming not only from active duty, but also from our Air Guard, our National Guards, that are coming into the work environment at a rate of, in this state, 30% unemployment. Not only are they coming back with the issues of PTSD and the injuries that they're sustaining, but they're coming back to a family that may not understand what they went through. And particularly with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a disease or a situation where it may not be readily identifiable. On the battlefield, you don't want to tell your commanders that you may have an issue because it's all about the mission. When you come back home, you may not want to tell your family you're suffering from certain symptoms. So you hold it in. And oftentimes we may not see the effects of it until years later at onset. So therefore it's something for us to recognize that this is an issue we need to deal with head on. Although when our troops come back from theater, they just want to get reacclimated to their families and back into society, they'll cast that aside and push it aside. But it's incumbent upon us to have programs dealing with either a local level for organizations that will help in this endeavor, or a VA system to help in this endeavor, to truly have good analysis and also do some good analyzing with regards to the end process, with regards to their medical evaluation, to make sure that any signs that we're seeing, and then also have them come back after 6 months or so for review to make sure that there's not an early onset of PTSD that could evolve into something larger. A few years ago, the President and the Congress established the Veterans Compensation and Disability Commission, which I served on for 3 years. We traveled across the country to get input as to how our veterans are being treated, how are the compensation being distributed, and is it fair? How are the families being taken care of? How are the families being addressed in this whole process? We recommended to the Congress a number of recommendations. Some have already been adopted and others are still on the table. But what's important to know is that the James Madison Institute didn't wait for Congress to act. They went out and sought information as to what's the core problem and then what are the solutions. And particularly with the downsizing in the revenue stream coming to DOD and our VA, It's important for us to now rely on our community-based organizations to provide the services that's necessary for individuals coming back in from theater. It's important in that it adds to either our work pool, it adds to our social order in our communities. It just is good common sense for us to provide a service and make sure we take very, very good care of those who have given us the sacrifices of self. And every last one of us who signed on a dotted line to say that we're going to serve and protect and defend our country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that we will do that even if it means giving life. And to that sacrifice, we cannot turn our backs to make sure that all men and women who serve are properly treated and properly given the dignity that they need to get their life back in order and get their families in order as well. It is very critical that we also look at the divorce rate and the substance abuse rate and the mental rate from our returning theater veterans. So not only do we have veterans, but we still have active duty personnel that are coming back from theater that may go back again. And when I served in the military, our deployments were 6 months at a time. Currently, our military men and women are going anywhere from 9, 12, 13, 18 months. And that is a very, very long time to be experiencing some of the things that our military men and women are seeing in theater. And then you come back home and try to bring some normalcy. It's not the easiest thing. You have to try to decompress, and what a lot of people will do is try to suppress it and hide it, but it will emerge in years to come. So for the things that we will be addressing, not only the amputees and the physical disability, but the mental disability will be a huge, huge undertaking for us to combat. So therefore, not only from our VA institutions, but our civilian organizations and our community organizations that will come to the table to help our military men and women. And I thank you for being engaged and involved.
Thank you, Governor Carroll. You should have written this report, I think. You know more than most of us. Now I'd like to, she mentioned the local services, and now I'd like to focus on 3 different service providers in the state of Florida that were partners with the Gulf Coast Community Foundation. We have first Chad Magnuson with the American Red Cross, who dealt mostly with financial emergency, financial assistance. We have Edie Docking from Quantum Leap Farms that provides alternative therapy for polytrauma patients that come out of James A. Haley Hospital. And then we have Welcome Home Vets with Nathan Thomas, who will talk about some of the mental health things that they're dealing with over on the Space Coast. So first I'd like to introduce Chad with the American Red Cross. Chad.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Governor, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Chad Magnuson. I'm the Executive Director with the American Red Cross, currently serving the Polk and Highlands County chapter. I've been the administrator of the Red Cross Brave Grant for about 2 years now. And I must tell you, this has been one of the greatest honors and privileges I've had in my Red Cross career. I spent the first 4 years of my Red Cross career serving the military overseas. I served in combat areas such as Iraq and the Balkans, serving the U.S. military on the front lines. Returning back to Florida, my home, I had the opportunity to then administer this grant, which was an enormous privilege. Like Mark said, our primary mission was to provide immediate emergency financial assistance. We served about 340 veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, usually in the first 6 months upon their return from their deployment. Our average financial assistance was well over $2,000. And the largest need, as you can imagine, because veterans often mirror the civilian community as well with their emergency needs, was things such as rent, mortgage assistance, home repairs, paying their electric bills, paying their utility bills, how to even get started on putting together a financial plan for their return. It was an enormous eye-opener for me. Serving with the military, I could see they were most of the folks that we met every day were very put together, very well-heeled, knew exactly what their plan was, what their mission was for that particular day. I'll never forget one story, and it's indicative of what we saw every single day with this program. And our program served Central Florida and the west coast of Florida. Had a young man who came to us through a referral. He had been out of the Army, he was a sergeant, E5, for about 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks. And he had been living on the beach in Clearwater in his car. Really didn't know what he was doing, how he got there, or why he was there. But somebody knew about the Brave Fund, talked with this gentleman, and sent him to our office in Tampa Bay. He came into my office and said, I used to be the sales manager of a luxury car dealership in Tampa. I had it all together. This is my third deployment to Iraq. The first two I came back fine. This one, I'm back. I have a pile of bills this high, and I don't know what to do with them. He opened up this huge briefcase that he brought with him and just poured them all on my desk and said, what do I do with these? Where do I go? I don't know what to do. I need some help. So myself, and another one of our caseworkers went through every single bill that he had accumulated since his deployment. He had no home. His apartment that he was renting he was evicted from. His car that he had previously had been repossessed. He didn't know what to do. That day, we were able to find him a new apartment and put a down payment and a deposit down for him. We were able to find him a car that somebody would donate to him for 1 year. And we were able to find him job placement as well. But most importantly, we were able to find someone who could help with his mental health needs. He knew about the VA and the benefits that came with that. He just didn't know what to do to access them. Somewhere along the line, this young man got dropped, fell through the cracks. And if it wasn't for someone just coming to us and saying, hey, there's this young man on the beach who just came back from Iraq and doesn't know what to do, this gentleman still could have been wandering the streets of Clearwater, looking for help, looking for assistance. I know to this day, he reconnected with his family, which lived up in Chicago. He's working again at a car dealership. He's got an apartment. He's got a fiance. This is 2 years later, and he's received all of the VA benefits that was due him at that time. This young man is back to recovery. But this program, if that immediate financial assistance wasn't available, we were able to pay basically all his expenses off within 24 to 48 hours. Just through the Red Cross infrastructure that we had in place, the funds that we had in place, we could just make it happen that quickly. If it wasn't for that meeting with this young man, we never would know what would have happened to him. And he may have been a part of the homeless community or been on the social services roles or something such as that. And the nonprofit community came in, and it wasn't just the Red Cross, it was others that said, hey, we're going to help this young man. And he was one of 340 veterans that we assisted during the 2 years that we had the honor and privilege of administering this grant. So thank you very much. And this was, like I said, this was a great honor for the Red Cross.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Next, I would like to have Edie Docking come up and talk about something that's unusual. When I first got their grant request, I go, what do horses have to do with military people? And so, Edie, why don't you come up and tell about your relationships with James A. Haley Hospital?
Good morning. I'm Edie Docking, and this is my colleague Carla Statz, and we're with Quantum Leap Farm, and we're a veteran service organization, and we empower people and transform lives through partnership with horses. The Brave Grant funding allowed us to serve well over 1,000 military service members and their families. It's been one of the greatest privileges that certainly we've ever had. And we've been able to address some of the collateral damage that your posters speak to. Probably one of the, we served a lot of polytrauma patients from James Haley VA Hospital, and their wives and kids would come out with them, and we came to realize, how much the families of military service members suffer along with those injured service members who have visible and invisible war-related injuries. So I think probably one of the best things that we were able to do with Brave Grant funding was create 2-day retreats for women of warriors, and Carla has headed up that program. And when Mark asked us to tell a story, Carla quickly thought of this particular gal and her family. So I'm going to turn it over to Carla to let her tell that story.
Thank you, Edie. Unfortunately, too typical of a story in this collateral damage that we speak of. But this participant in our retreats, where they fly in from all over the area and of the United States, and she is from Texas, and she has an autistic son, and they found her husband, who had slit his throat twice. The lieutenant governor spoke of the invisible wound of post-traumatic stress disorder, which becomes very visible. And first of all, through the first line of defense, the family. And so through these retreats, we educate them on post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury and empower them in ways that they can return back home with a new perspective and a new way to help their returning veteran in this gap, which is really a canyon between services and their help. So we are so grateful for the opportunity from Gulf Coast Community Foundation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark, for having us today. What a pleasure.
Thank you. And last but not least, retired Colonel Nathan Cohn.
Good morning. What I want to talk about basically is that we wanted to form Welcome Home Vets, a program that was enhanced by people who had been in the military, purely military. We knew what the issues were. We knew who had been there and done that. For me, it was 39 years of military service. But to also find out what was needed, and also because I've been a real disciple of the beloved community. I don't know how many of you know about that, but it was something that started many, many years ago, that it had to start from the community. You know, we can do all these other things. So when Mark presented us with the opportunity to go out and serve and help other people, that's exactly what we did. There are three different sides to what we do. The clinicals, the people who send packages down range, and those we seek out that are homeless. And what we have done is put kind of a mainstay on finding the homeless people out there, because now we are finding both homeless women, we're finding people who dropped out of the system, locating them, and making sure they know about their benefits, knowing sure that they get medical treatment. We work with people like George Taylor, who himself was a homeless vet. In doing that, we were able to make that transition and talk with people and find out why they had dropped out of the system. But also the grant allowed us to venture deeper than that, to find out if there's a cause for this PTSD, what do you do with it, other than send them to the VA. We wanted to shorten the length of time that they had to go to the VA. So on the clinical side, we have psychologists who write up the reports, submit them, which cuts down on a lot of the time that's out there, because the VA is just swamped with people trying to get in to get what they need. So those folks who drop out, we help them make that leap from where they dropped out to now being into the system so they can get their benefits. But on the clinical side, we learned how to do brain retraining, which is the cutting edge technology. And because of the grant, we were able to do that. We've been able to service over 13,283 people to date. When you break that down, you will find out that there are many folks who drop out of the system, who know nothing about what's going on today, the advantages of going to the VA and getting those things taken care of, or how to even do that. So we've been able to do that. The one story I remember more than anything else is a young lady who was command sergeant major of mine when I was in the Army, who Diomi, which is a place at Patrick Air Force Base that they teach all different instructions to the different folks who are returning, had been deployed. This particular lady had been deployed 8 times and kind of dropped out of the system. And we happened to be doing a research out in the woods to find her there. And I asked, Sergeant Major, what are you doing? And you serve your country on 8 different tours. And she said, well, nobody cared. And she was living on food stamps. So what we were able to do is go out and talk with her, get her reinvigorated into thinking that I can do it again on my own. With that being said, she now has been employed, has a job, and has returned to pretty much where she was before she left and was homeless. So I want to thank you for all of your contributions, certainly Mark, for giving us that opportunity. Thank you.
Now I'd like to ask Lieutenant Colonel Steve Murray, retired United States Air Force, the Communications Director for the Florida Department of Veterans Affairs, to come forward.
Well, good morning, everyone. As an Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran, I want to thank my fellow veterans for both being here today and for participating in the study. I do want to recognize the former Executive Director of the Florida Department of Veterans Affairs who's with us today, Rocky McPherson. Rocky, thank you for your service to our nation. Appreciate you being here today. As was mentioned earlier, the late Rear Admiral Leroy Collins Jr. was the Executive Director of the Florida Department of Veterans Affairs during the time of this study. And I'm pleased that the James Madison Institute has dedicated this particular publication to the late Admiral Collins. He was a champion of the report. He met with Dr. Susan McManus, who will follow me in just a second, and talked about a lot of issues affecting Florida's veterans. One of them was veterans outreach and being able to reach these younger veterans and their families to let them know about the benefits that they've earned as a result of their military service. I'm pleased to tell you, Dr. McManus, that one of his initiatives was to use social media as an outreach tool. And indeed, based upon his conversations with you, our agency started a Facebook page attracting younger veterans and their families to the world of Veterans Affairs, both federal and state. So thank you for that very much. And with that, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Another woman of the state of Florida who needs no introduction. Many of you knew Dr. Susan A. McManus, Distinguished University Professor at the University of South Florida. You have seen and heard of her on numerous media outlets across the country. I'd like to ask Dr. McManus to come forward and speak about the study.
Thank you. Good morning. I get very emotional about this. You know, academics aren't known for that, but this was a study that was very real to me. And when Mark called to ask me if I would help them design the research to get at this problem, it didn't take me 2 seconds to say yes. For one thing, I have had in my classes at USF for the last 2 or 3 years returning Iraqi and Afghanistan veterans. And since I have a nephew who's in the National Guard, these students became very personal to me, and they trusted me a lot, and I would go to lunch with them, and they would talk about their problems and ideas about what could be done. So much of the impetus for me enthusiastically getting involved with this came from my role as an educator. And I couldn't be prouder of the fact that 2 of our USF students in the honors program worked with me and my colleague, Dr. Susan Schuler, who's a private small business owner who does market research, who did the polling and the focus groups. So this was a team effort all the way, as military things always are. There's several things I think are worthy of talking about, and I'll answer any specific questions you have a little bit later, is the fact that this is, to my knowledge, from looking at studies across the country, the first one to take a very holistic look by including in the research design, first of all, the veterans themselves, but secondly and powerfully, families. And we were, I believe, the first group as well to enlarge and expand our definition of family. Because in talking with the young men and young ladies in my class, former vets, they would often mention grandparents, siblings, cousins, uncles. So our focus group expanded the definition of family. And the third thing we did was to do the first statewide survey of what people in Florida feel about all this. And as Mark mentioned earlier, I think, Bob, when you get 92% of Floridians agreeing that this is not just important, it's very important. To me, that was so rewarding because I know that many, many people will use the details in these surveys to make policies that are very important. I think a third thing that this study was designed to do was to come up with things that local communities can do, and not just focus always on recommending new agencies and big $1 million kinds of programs, but things that are doable by local people for their local returning vets. And out of this, it's the simple things that you and I take for granted that are troubling sometimes and problematic for these returning vets. The first is how you find out what's going on in your community. Well, a simple suggestion is, because they're used to it in the military with its organization and discipline, having one place where there would be kind of like a community bulletin board, whether it's on Facebook or on a website where all of the local services would be announced and all of those support groups would be promoted. Some place that could be easily advertised by local businesses who could have something as simple as in their window as we support our troops, information about where to get help. That doesn't cost a lot. It's good for the businesses. It's good for the families. It's good for the returning vets. That's just an example of something very simple to do. Doesn't cost a lot, but would go miles to help these people. And the young man who counseled me said, look, when we out process, they give us a list of all the things we've got to do. And when we in process at the next place, they give us a similar list. But when we go back home and we separate, and we have to reintegrate, we have nothing. So there again, something so simple as constructing a list at the local level, as we mentioned, would go a long way towards helping these vets reintegrate. I guess the third or fourth most powerful thing I saw was the fact that it really was very compelling that the veterans themselves said they had two problems. One, of course, was employment, but secondly, strained family relationships. And when we hear family, you and I might think of spouses, but to the person in the focus group, they mention their children first. And they have been a lot forgotten in other states, and we certainly don't want that to happen here. So it was, again, to summarize, a study which was very holistic. We studied the families, we studied the veterans, we studied the agencies who served them, and we studied the Florida public at large. It was an honor and a pleasure, and probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done as an academic. And thank you for giving me and Dr. Schuler and my students the chance to work on this. We really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
You'd be available for questions. So in your packet, you'll see two reports. You'll see the detailed report that James Madison did, and then for people that have short attention spans like me, we have an executive summary report. And these will be available online at our respective websites and our respective organizations for people to access as PDF files. Okay. So I guess we'll entertain questions from the media now, of the nonprofits or of Susan or of Bob. That's the first time I've seen that.
We're standing in the way of lunch. That's why there's no questions.
What's next?
Well, this is becoming a national issue. The White House has adopted this as one of their priorities for families. I'm going to San Antonio this weekend to meet with other foundations around the country to see how philanthropy can continue to do this on a nationwide basis. So that'll be one of the next steps that we'll be looking at, is philanthropy still stepping in, leveraging the dollars to make policy changes possibly, and to rally local community support.
For the Institute, two of our major issues for many, many years have been government transparency and efficiency, and the role of private philanthropy that can step into the breach. So we will continue to advance strategically in those two areas, to move government more towards transparency. You know, as I was telling an NPR radio station in Tampa this morning, in a day and age when we can track a FedEx or UPS package from Moscow to Tallahassee, Florida every second of the day until it gets here, we should be able to do a better job of streamlining and making things from a government standpoint more transparent. So those will be the two issues that we'll be strategically moving forward on.
I would like to say one thing along the lines of what I think is worrisome to the veterans. They're very worried that as the public support of the wars declines, that they will be forgotten. And what we heard loud and clear in this study was Floridians do not want them to be forgotten. They want them and their families to be helped.
Dr. McManus, while you're there, was wondering in this time of a tight job market, what did the survey pick up as far as public or employer perception of returning veterans, perhaps as damaged goods? And yeah, we'd like to hire Mary or Joey, but you know, we're worried about what may have happened to them while they were deployed.
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because one of the astounding things to me in the survey was the fact that two different groups of Floridians who could help vets the most, which are business owners and also college-educated people, know the least about what's available for the vets. I didn't pick up much on the concern about the issues. They understand the health issues, but there's still a very strong willingness to hire veterans because they have very good work ethic. That's what I heard a lot of the small businesses particularly say, that they are dependable, and so that goes a long way. But I do think that the fact that your business community and your college-educated people, leaders in the community, who are best positioned to help, are really the ones who are in the dark, so to speak, about what needs to be done and what is available. And we're hoping that this report will go a long way towards filling that void. Thank you.
I have one question. I'm an Iraq war vet, and I'm currently using the GI Bill to attend Florida State. I was wondering why, if support is so strong for veterans that benefits are in the decline right now, and BAH for the GI Bill is actually frozen, and that's in the end going to turn out to be money out of my pocket. So what are we going to do with this study to make sure that I'm not affected terribly by that?
Well, one of the problems, of course, is the fact that some of the programs you're talking about are federally funded, and we know that the federal government is having extreme financial difficulties right now, and they're taking the axe to a lot of things that people feel passionately and strongly about, which, again, is, I think, what both Bob and Mark would say is that, if government can't do it, it's going to be up to local community groups to step in, and part of it is people like you letting local community leaders know what's absent and what kind of pressures are on you.
Yes. One of the most active groups that I know out there, and we have that in some of the Who's Helping, is the Iraq-Afghanistan Veterans Association, IAVA. They're very strong advocates in Washington. I was also in Washington last year and spoke with the speaker's staff, and Congress is very frustrated with the federal VA sometimes. It's a huge bureaucracy. You have the DOD and the VA, and they don't talk to each other. It's hard to track people. And that was one of the things that we found, as you mentioned, Bob. We can track a FedEx package, but we can't find our service people that are being reintegrated back in society, because once they leave DOD, it's optional whether they sign up for the VA or not, or how they do it. So we lose track of them. So IAVA.org is a very strong advocate for those benefits, and I would look up their site and contact them.
But that's a good point, because by talking about local communities and private nonprofits, and they're important, but aren't you letting government off the hook? Or someone mentioned families are the first line of defense. Well, shouldn't the military be the first line of defense? I mean, why is there a breach in the first place?
Well, there again, as I said in my opening comments, government needs to become more streamlined and more efficient and more transparent. So if that was the impression that we were letting government off the hook, it's quite the contrary. And so as the gentleman asked, what's next? At least for the Institute, in terms of our mission, it's to hold government accountable so that our men and women returning from Iraq and Afghanistan receive those benefits they deserve. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention Bob Sanchez, our policy director at the James Madison Institute, who had a very strong hand in editing much of the report with Dr. McClure. And I apologize, Bob, for not mentioning that at the beginning. Any other questions? I think everybody will be here for a few questions afterwards. Dr. McClure, all right. Thank you all very much for being here.